The rain hammered against the windows like tiny fists trying to get in. Henry Walsh sat in his living room surrounded by boxes he couldn't bring himself to open. Each one contained pieces of Maria, his wife who had left this world 3 weeks ago. Her singing shells still lined the mantelpiece, silent now without her touch to wake their music. The water garden she had loved sat stagnant in the corner, its special filtration system turned off because Henry couldn't bear to hear it running, without her there to enjoy it. He was 71 years old and felt every single day of it pressing down on his shoulders. The house creaked around him, too big and too empty. Neighbors had been leaving meals at his door for weeks. Most of them had gone bad before he remembered to bring them inside. His daughter Ruth called every day from Mars, her voice tight with worry, but Henry told her the same lies each time. Yes, he was eating. Yes, he was sleeping. Yes, he was managing just fine. None of it was true. Maria had been a Thalassian, one of the water people who had come to Earth after the Great Concordance back in 2189. They had met 45 years ago on Europa, where Henry had been installing life support systems for the new colony. She had been working as a translator, helping human engineers understand the needs of various alien species. Her skin had shimmered like mother of pearl under the station lights, and when she laughed, it sounded like water flowing over smooth stones. Their marriage had surprised everyone. Humans and Thalassian didn't usually pair up. The biological differences were too great, the cultural gaps too wide. But they had made it work. They had built this house together on the Oregon coast, where Maria could look out at the Pacific and remember her homeworld's endless oceans. They had raised Ruth, who carried genes from both species and could breathe underwater for hours at a time. 43 years of marriage. 43 years of learning each other's languages, both spoken and unspoken. 43 years of love that transcended the boundaries of species and origin. And now she was gone. Henry picked up one of her singing shells, held it to his ear out of habit. Nothing. The shells only sang for Thalassian hands. He set it back down carefully, his fingers trembling. The knock at the door startled him so badly he nearly dropped the shell. He ignored it. Probably another well-meaning neighbor with another casserole he wouldn't eat. But the knock came again, harder this time. More insistent. "Go away," Henry called out, his voice rough from disuse. "No." The voice from outside was female, deep, with a rumbling quality that made the windows vibrate slightly. Henry frowned. He knew that voice. Lyra Cindermaw, the Draken woman who lived 2 houses down the beach. They had exchanged pleasantries over the years at community gatherings, but nothing more than that. She kept to herself mostly, and so had he and Maria. The door rattled as she knocked again. "Henry Walsh, open this door or I will melt the lock." It wasn't an idle threat. Draken could manipulate temperature with their bodies. Henry had seen Lyra light her outdoor fire pit with just a touch of her hand. He heaved himself out of his chair, bones protesting, and shuffled to the door. When he opened it, Lyra stood on his porch like a statue carved from bronze. Her scales caught the dim light, metallic and beautiful. She was tall, nearly 6.5 feet, with eyes that glowed amber in the gloom. She wore simple clothes, a long coat beaded with rain. "I'm fine," Henry said before she could speak. "Thank you for checking, but I don't need anything." "You are dying," Lyra said bluntly. "Not in body, but in spirit. I have seen this before. I will not watch it happen to you. That's not your concern. I am making it my concern." She stepped forward, and Henry found himself stepping back, allowing her into his home. "My mate died 6 years ago. I know this darkness you are in. I know it intimately. You need help and I need purpose. We will help each other. I didn't ask for your help. People who are drowning rarely do." Lyra moved past him into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the neglected space. Dishes piled in the sink. Spoiled food on the counters. "When did you last eat a real meal?" "I eat. When?" Henry couldn't remember. "Yesterday? The day before?" Time had become fluid and meaningless. Lyra opened his refrigerator, made a disapproving sound in her throat that came out like a low growl. "This will not do. I will return in 1 hour with supplies. You will shower and change clothes while I am gone. When I return, we will eat together. Now wait just a minute." She turned to face him fully, and her eyes blazed with an intensity that froze the protest in his throat. "I have lived 174 years, Henry Walsh. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched friends die and children grow old. I have earned the right to speak plainly. You are killing yourself with grief, and I will not permit it. Not when I have the power to prevent it. You can't just decide to. I already have. She moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the handle. 1 hour, shower, clean clothes. I will teach you something my people learned long ago. The dead are honored by living fully, not by joining them prematurely. Then she was gone, leaving Henry standing in his kitchen feeling like a hurricane had just passed through. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to lock his doors and ignore her. But something in her words had pierced through the fog of his grief. The dead are honored by living fully. Maria would have said something similar. She had always been practical, even at the end. Even when her respiratory system had begun failing, a common problem for land-adapted thalassin in their later years, she had refused to let him mourn before she was gone. Henry looked around his kitchen, really seeing it for the first time in weeks. The mess, the decay, the slow rot of a life abandoned. Was this how he wanted to honor her memory? He climbed the stairs to the bathroom, each step an effort, and turned on the shower. 5 days had passed since Lyra had walked into his life uninvited, and Henry still wasn't sure how he felt about it. She arrived every morning at 7 sharp, let herself in through the door he had stopped bothering to lock, and set about managing his existence with the efficiency of a military operation. She cooked meals that somehow accounted for both human and Draken nutritional needs. She sorted through the mountain of condolence messages and colony administrative documents that Henry had been ignoring. She forced him out of the house every afternoon for walks along the beach, regardless of weather. And she slept in his guest room without asking permission, as if it had always been her room. Henry resented every moment of it. You need to eat more, Lyra said, sliding a plate of food across the table toward him. Some kind of fish with vegetables he didn't recognize. It smelled good, which annoyed him further. He didn't want to enjoy anything. I'm eating enough. You have lost weight. I can see it in your face. Her amber eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Maria would not want you to waste away. That sparked anger in him, hot and sudden. Don't talk about her like you knew her. You didn't. You never came to our home, never shared meals with us, never bothered to be anything more than a distant neighbor. Lyra's expression didn't change. She was infuriatingly calm. You are correct. I did not know her well. I kept my distance from everyone after Torvin died. That was my mistake, my own weakness. I will not make it again. I don't need you here, Henry said, pushing the plate away. I don't need your pity or your charity or whatever this is. This is not pity. Lyra leaned back in her chair, her scales catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. This is survival. For both of us. I'm surviving just fine. You were lying in filth, starving yourself, surrounded by ghosts. Her voice remained steady, matter of fact. That is not survival. That is a slow form of suicide. Henry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand. Maria and I, we were everything to each other. 43 years together. She was my whole world. I understand perfectly. Lyra's voice finally showed emotion, a crack in her controlled exterior. Torvin and I were bonded for 87 years. 87 years, Henry. You have not yet lived as long as I loved him. Do not tell me I do not understand loss. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Henry sat back down slowly, feeling ashamed of himself. He had been so wrapped up in his own grief that he had forgotten Lyra carried her own burden. How do you do it? He asked quietly. How do you keep going? Some days I do not know. Lyra pulled the plate back toward him, a gentle but firm gesture. But I wake each morning and I choose to live that day. Then I wake the next morning and choose again. It does not become easier, but it becomes possible. Henry picked up his fork, took a bite of the fish. It was delicious, seasoned with herbs he couldn't identify. What was he like, Torvin? For the first time since she had burst into his life, Lyra smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger despite her 174 years. Insufferable. He sang constantly terrible songs he made up himself. He collected rocks, thousands of them, and he could tell you the story of where each one came from. He worked in the asteroid mines and came home covered in dust every day, tracking it through our home no matter how many times I asked him to use the cleaning chamber first. She paused, her smile fading, but not disappearing entirely. He made me laugh. Every single day for 87 years he found a way to make me laugh. When he died in the mining accident, I thought the sound of laughter had died with him. Henry found himself talking about Maria then, memories spilling out that he had been holding locked inside. How she had loved storms and would stand on the viewing platform for hours watching the lightning dance across the ocean. How she had sung to their daughter Ruth in the Thalassian language, songs about deep water and ancient tides. How she had tried to teach him to swim properly and dissolved into giggles every time he flailed around like, in her words, a drowning cat. She wanted to die in the ocean, Henry said, his voice breaking. She asked me to take her body out past the breakers to let the currents carry her home. But I couldn't do it. I had her cremated instead, like a human. I kept her here with me because I was too selfish to let her go. Lyra reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her scales were warm, almost hot, and the contact startled him. Grief makes us selfish. It makes us hold tight to anything we can grasp. But you did not trap her, Henry. Her body was just a shell. Whatever made her who she was, that returned to the tides long before you made any decisions about her remains. They sat like that for a while. Two grieving people holding on to each other across a kitchen table in a house that had seen too much sorrow. Eventually, Lyra withdrew her hand and stood. Tomorrow we walk further, she announced. Down to the tide pools. You will show me where Maria liked to explore. I don't think I can. You can. You will. She gathered up their plates. And next week your daughter is visiting from Mars. You will need to clean this house properly before she arrives. I will help you. Henry wanted to protest, to tell her that Ruth wasn't coming, but then he remembered the last call. Ruth had said she was worried. She had said she was booking transport. He had been too deep in his fog to really hear her. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He got up and found Lyra sitting on his back deck, looking out at the ocean. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. Did I wake you? He asked. No, I do not sleep much. She gestured to the chair beside her. Draken need less sleep than humans. It becomes both blessing and curse in times like these. More time to think means more time to remember. Henry sat down. They watched the waves together in silence. Finally he said, Why are you really doing this? Helping me? Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Because I saw myself in you. 6 years ago, after Torvin died, I returned to Earth and locked myself away. I thought if I kept the world at a distance, the pain would stay at a distance too. But pain does not work that way. It grows in isolation. It becomes monstrous. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. I was going to leave Earth. Go somewhere remote, somewhere I could exist alone until my years ran out. Then I saw you deteriorating in this house, and I saw my future. That is what I would become if I kept on my path. So I made a choice. Save you and perhaps save myself in the process. That's honest, at least. My people value honesty above all else. She returned her gaze to the ocean. Besides, you are a good person, Henry Walsh. Maria spoke of you sometimes at colony gatherings. She loved you deeply. That love deserves to be honored, not buried in grief. They sat together until dawn began to paint the sky pink and gold. Two lonely souls finding something like comfort in shared silence. Henry woke up with an idea buzzing in his head like an insect that wouldn't leave him alone. He lay in bed for a moment, startled by the sensation. It had been so long since he had felt anything like interest or curiosity that he had almost forgotten what it felt like. He got up and went to his office, a room he hadn't entered since Maria died. Dust covered everything. His old engineering equipment sat silent on the shelves. He pulled out his drawing tablet and stylus, powered them up, and started sketching. When Lyra arrived at her usual time, she found him hunched over the tablet, muttering to himself and making calculations. What are you doing? She asked, setting down the bag of groceries she had brought. Your house is bleeding heat, Henry said without looking up. I've been watching how much energy it takes to keep your place warm enough for a Draken. It's incredibly inefficient. The insulation is all wrong. The heating system is designed for humans, and you're probably paying 3 times what you should on power bills. Lyra moved closer, looking over his shoulder at the sketches. I have learned to tolerate the cold. You shouldn't have to tolerate it. You should be comfortable. He made another notation on the design. I could fix it. Redesign your heating system. Add proper insulation rated for Draken temperature needs. Install thermal regulators in the walls. It would take maybe 2 weeks of work. Why would you do this? Henry finally looked up at her. Because I'm an engineer. It's what I do. And because you've been helping me for weeks. Let me help you back. Something shifted in Lyra's expression. Then we have work to do. The project consumed Henry completely. He threw himself into it with an energy he hadn't felt in months. He ordered parts from the colony supply depot. He measured and calculated and redesigned. He explained thermodynamics to Lyra while they worked, his old passion for engineering flooding back like water through a broken dam. Lyra helped where she could, her Draken strength useful for moving heavy equipment and tearing out old insulation. They worked side by side, and Henry found himself talking more, laughing occasionally, feeling almost like himself again. Word spread through the retirement colony quickly. Humans and aliens alike gossiped over shared meals about the widowed engineer who had emerged from his grief to help his Draken neighbor. Within days, other people started approaching Henry with their own problems. Peter Donovan, an elderly human, who lived 3 streets over, knocked on Henry's door one afternoon. He was 92 and used a mobility chair that had seen better days. "Heard you're fixing things again," Peter said, his voice wheezy with age. "My chair's been acting up, keeps veering left. The repair shop says they need to order parts from off-world, but that'll take months. You think you could look at it?" Henry found himself saying yes before he had time to think about it. He spent 2 days diagnosing the problem, which turned out to be a simple calibration issue that he fixed with tools he already had. Peter was so grateful he nearly cried. Then came the Ventari couple from next door. Insectoid beings with delicate respiratory systems that required precise humidity control. Their system had broken down, and they were struggling in the dry coastal air. Henry designed a new moisture regulator that maintained their home at optimal levels without causing mold problems in the structure. Aquelin family, crystalline beings who processed light for nutrition, needed help filtering the sunlight that came through their windows. Too much and they would get sick. Too little, and they would weaken. Henry created an adaptive filtering system that adjusted throughout the day based on light intensity and weather conditions. Each project energized him more. Each problem solved gave him purpose. His house, which had been a tomb of grief, became a workshop filled with parts and plans and possibility. Lyra watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. She brought him meals while he worked, reminded him to sleep, kept his space organized when he became too focused to notice the mess accumulating around him. They fell into an easy partnership, their friendship deepening through shared tasks and comfortable silence. One evening, while they were installing the final thermal regulator in Lyra's bedroom wall, she said, "You are different now." Different how? Present. When I first came to your home, you were there but not there, a ghost haunting your own life. Now you are here, solid, real. Henry secured the regulator panel and stood back to admire their work. "I think I forgot who I was without Maria. Being an engineer, helping people, solving problems, that was always part of me, but I had gotten so used to being her husband that I lost sight of everything else I was. She would be proud of what you are doing." "I hope so." Henry picked up his tools. "I keep thinking she's going to walk through the door and tell me I'm making a mess that I need to clean up after myself. My mate Torvin was like that too, always after me to organize, to put things in their proper place. I was chaotic and he was ordered. We balanced each other." Lyra ran her hand along the wall, feeling the warmth now radiating properly through her home. "I still expect to hear his voice sometimes singing those terrible songs." They stood together in her bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of their work, and Henry felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was close. It was contentment. It was purpose. It was the first small green shoot of healing pushing up through frozen ground. Ruth called that night from Mars, her holographic projection appearing in Henry's living room. She looked different than she had at the funeral. Less worried, more curious. "Dad, you sound good," she said, her voice carrying the slight echo of long-distance communication. "Really good. What's going on?" Henry told her about the projects, about helping neighbors, about working with Lyra. Ruth listened, her face going through a series of expressions he couldn't quite read. Who is this Lyra person? Ruth asked finally. I don't remember you and Mom mentioning her much. She's a neighbor, a friend. Henry realized as he said it that it was true. Lyra had become his friend somewhere along the way. She helped me when I needed help. Is she there now? She's next door. We just finished installing a new heating system in her house. Ruth was quiet for a moment. I'm coming to visit next month. I want to meet her properly. After the call ended, Henry sat in his living room and looked at the singing shells on the mantelpiece. They were still silent, still waiting for Thalassin hands that would never touch them again. But somehow they didn't seem quite as sad anymore. They were just objects, beautiful and meaningful but no longer unbearable to look at. He picked one up and held it carefully. I think I'm going to be okay, he whispered to it, to Maria's memory, to the empty air. It still hurts, and I miss you every day. But I'm going to be okay. The shell offered no response, but Henry thought that maybe that was answer enough. 3 months after Lyra had knocked on his door, Henry was working on his 5th community project when a stranger appeared at his workshop. She was human, probably in her 50s, with gray streaking through her dark hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. Henry Walsh? She asked, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Nessa Prine. I'm a grief counselor working on a research project about bereavement across different species. I've heard a lot about you and your neighbor Lyra Cindermaw. I was hoping we could talk. Henry wiped grease off his hands and shook her hand. I'm not much for counseling, Dr. Prine. Call me Nessa, and this isn't counseling exactly. More like a conversation. She looked around his workshop with interest. I'm studying how different species process grief and loss. The colony administrator suggested I speak with you and Lyra. He said what you two have done together is remarkable. We're just helping each other out. That's exactly what makes it remarkable. Nessa pulled out a small recording device. Would you mind if we talked over tea? I'd love to hear your story if you're willing to share it. Henry found himself agreeing, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe because Nessa had a warmth about her that reminded him of Maria. Maybe because he was curious what a grief counselor would make of his situation. He called Lyra, who joined them within minutes. They sat in Henry's living room, tea steaming in cups around them, and Nessa asked questions that cut straight to the heart of things. How do Draken traditionally handle loss? She asked Lyra. We endure, Lyra said simply. Our lives are long. We accumulate many losses. To survive, we must learn to carry grief without letting it destroy us. We become like stone, hard and permanent. We do not speak of our pain. We simply continue. And Thalassin, Nessa turned to Henry. Maria told me once that when Thalassin lose someone they love, they return to the ocean. Some of them dive deep and stay there, living in the underwater cities, never coming back to land. They let the water hold their grief. Henry stared into his tea. I think that's what she wanted for herself at the end. To go back to the water. But she stayed on land for me because I couldn't follow her there. And humans? Nessa asked. Henry thought about it. We break. We fall apart completely. But then we start picking up the pieces and putting ourselves back together. Sometimes the pieces don't fit the same way they did before, but we keep trying anyway. Nessa nodded slowly, making notes on her tablet. Every species I've studied has their own way of processing loss. But what's fascinating is how rarely species help each other through it. Most humans grieve with humans. Most Draken isolate themselves completely. Each species stays within their own community, follows their own traditions. We are taught that grief is personal, Lyra said. Draken do not burden others with their pain. But you burdened Henry, Nessa pointed out gently. You came to his door and refused to leave. Lyra glanced at Henry, something complex passing between them. I made a choice to break tradition. It seemed necessary. And you, Henry? Did you want her help? No, Henry admitted. I wanted to be left alone to die slowly in my grief. But Lyra didn't give me that option. She just showed up and took over. Do you resent her for it? Henry looked at Lyra, at her amber eyes watching him carefully. Not anymore. At first, yes. But she saved my life. I was drowning and she pulled me out of the water. Nessa leaned forward. What you two have done, this cross-species healing, it's exactly what my research is about. Most beings in the galaxy, when they lose someone, they curl inward. They grieve alone. But you reached across species boundaries to help each other. That's rare. That's valuable. We just did what needed doing, Henry said. Exactly. Nessa set down her tea. I'm organizing a gathering next month at the Colony Pavilion. I want to bring together people from different species who have experienced loss, create a space where they can share their experiences, learn from each other. Would you two be willing to speak? To share your story? Henry and Lyra looked at each other. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people and talking about their grief felt impossible. Their pain was private, personal. I don't think so, Henry said. What Lyra and I went through, that's our business. I understand. Nessa stood to leave. But think about it. There are so many beings in this colony, in this galaxy, who are alone in their grief, who don't know how to survive it. Your story could help them. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show others that survival is possible. After she left, Henry and Lyra sat in silence for a long time. She wants us to make ourselves vulnerable in front of strangers, Lyra said finally. That's what it sounds like. My people would see it as weakness, putting private pain on display. Yeah, I'm not thrilled about it either. But the idea stuck with Henry. He thought about it while he worked on his projects. He thought about Peter Donovan alone in his house with his failing chair. He thought about the Vintari couple struggling to breathe. He thought about all the beings in the colony who were likely suffering in silence, following their species' traditions, not knowing there were other ways to survive grief. A week later, Lyra appeared at his door earlier than usual. She looked like she hadn't slept, her scales dull with exhaustion. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice rough. A truth I have not spoken aloud. Henry led her inside, concerned. What's wrong? When Torvin died, I did not grieve in the Draken way. I tried, but I could not become stone. The pain was too much. I thought about ending my life. I stood at the edge of a cliff on Mars and nearly stepped off. Her hands trembled slightly, but I did not because I was afraid. Not of death, but of being forgotten. Of Torvin being forgotten. She looked at Henry with desperate eyes. I came to your house not just to save you. I came to save myself. 6 years I have been alone, and every day was harder than the last. I was going to leave Earth, go to some remote station where I could exist alone until I faded away. Then I saw you, and I saw my own death in your eyes, and I could not let it happen. Not to you, not to me. Henry reached out and took her hand, the heat of her scales warming his palm. You should have told me. I was ashamed. Draken do not admit weakness. We're all weak, Henry said. That's the secret everyone pretends isn't true. We're all just barely holding on, doing our best to make it through each day. They sat together, holding hands. Two beings from different worlds united by the simple fact of loss and survival. I think we should speak at the gathering, Henry said finally. I think Nessa is right. We can't be the only ones who are suffering. Maybe if we show others that it's possible to survive this, that it's possible to help each other across all our differences, maybe that means something. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. We tell the truth, all of it. Even the parts that hurt. Even the parts that make us look weak. Even those parts, Henry agreed. They called Nessa that afternoon and agreed to speak. Henry had no idea what he was going to say, how he was going to stand in front of hundreds of people and talk about the worst period of his life. But he knew it was the right thing to do. Maria had always believed in helping others. She had spent her life building bridges between species, translating not just languages but whole ways of thinking. Maybe this was how Henry could honor her memory. By showing others that love and loss transcended the boundaries of species, that healing was possible even across the vast differences that separated them. It was what humans did best, he realized. They reached out. They built connections. They refused to let differences stop them from caring about each other. In a galaxy of long-lived species who had learned to protect themselves by staying isolated, humans kept reaching across the void and saying, let me help. Let us help each other. Maybe that was worth sharing after all. 6 months had passed since that rainy day when Lyra had knocked on his door and refused to leave. Henry's life had developed a comfortable rhythm. Lyra still spent most of her time at his house, though she slept in her own place most nights. They worked on projects together, shared meals, took long walks on the beach. The colony had come to see them as a unit, the unlikely pair who had somehow become inseparable. The gathering organized by Dr. Prine had been a success. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species had attended. Henry and Lyra had stood on that stage and told their stories, and afterward, people had approached them with tears in their eyes, thanking them for their honesty. The colony had started implementing what they called the Henry Protocol, matching newly grieving beings with those who had survived loss, creating support networks that crossed species lines. Everything should have been good. Everything should have been settling into place. But Henry had a problem he hadn't anticipated, and it was eating him alive with guilt. He was falling in love with Lyra. It had crept up on him slowly. The way she hummed while she cooked, a deep rumbling sound that made the windows vibrate slightly. The way she listened when he talked, her full attention focused on him like he was the only person in the universe. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes, a sound like distant thunder that never failed to make him smile. The way she pushed him to be better, to live more fully, to honor Maria's memory by embracing life instead of hiding from it. He tried to ignore the feelings, tried to convince himself it was just gratitude, just friendship, just the natural closeness that came from spending so much time together. But he knew better. He had been married for 43 years. He knew the difference between friendship and love, and this was definitely moving toward something more than friendship. The guilt was crushing. Maria had only been gone for 8 months. 8 months! How could he even think about loving someone else? How could he betray her memory like this? And beyond the guilt, there was the practical impossibility of it. Lyra was a Draken. She would outlive him by more than 2 centuries. She had already lost one mate. How could he even consider putting her through that pain again? He started pulling away, making excuses to work alone, keeping conversations surface level. Lyra noticed immediately, of course. She was too perceptive not to. "What is wrong?" she asked one evening when he had barely spoken during dinner. "Nothing. Just tired." "You are lying." Her amber eyes studied him. "You have been distant for 2 weeks now. Have I done something to offend you?" "No, of course not." "Then what has changed?" Henry couldn't tell her. Couldn't admit what he was feeling. So he did the cowardly thing. "Maybe you should spend more time at your own house. We've been in each other's space constantly. Everyone needs privacy sometimes." Lyra went very still. Her scales, which usually caught and reflected light beautifully, seemed to dull. "I see. It's not personal, you do not need to explain." She stood, moving toward the door with mechanical precision. "I will respect your wishes." She left, and Henry sat alone in his kitchen feeling like he had just made a terrible mistake. But what else could he do? Tell her the truth? Burden her with feelings she almost certainly didn't return? Ruin the friendship they had built? The next morning Lyra didn't come over. Or the day after that. Or the day after that. Henry told himself it was for the best, that he needed space to get his feelings under control. But the house felt wrong without her. Too quiet, too empty. He found himself listening for her footsteps, looking up expecting to see her standing in his kitchen, reaching for his phone to call her before stopping himself. He was miserable, and he had no one to blame but himself. Ruth arrived for her visit 2 weeks later and immediately knew something was wrong. She stood in the living room, looking around at the house that had somehow become messy again, at her father who had dark circles under his eyes. "What happened?" she demanded. "You were doing so well." "Where's Lyra?" "She's at her own house." "Why?" "Because I asked her to give me space." Ruth stared at him like he had grown a second head. "Dad, are you serious?" "That woman saved your life and you pushed her away. Why would you do that?" "It's complicated." "Explain it to me then." "Uncomplicated." Henry sank into his chair, suddenly exhausted. "I started having feelings for her. More than friendship. And I felt guilty about it, like I was betraying your mother's memory, so I pushed her away before I could make things awkward between us." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him. "Dad, there's something Mom made me promise to tell you. She made me swear I wouldn't say it until you were ready to hear it, until you were healing enough to understand." "What are you talking about?" 2 weeks before she died, when you had gone to get her medicine, Mom called me. She knew she didn't have much time left." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "She told me that when you were ready, when you had grieved and started living again, she wanted me to tell you something. She said, the heart is an ocean. It has room for many tides." Henry felt like he had been punched in the chest. "She said that?" "She loved you so much, Dad, but she was also practical. She knew she was going to die first, and she knew you would have years left to live. She didn't want you to spend those years alone because you thought loving someone else would dishonor her memory. Ruth reached across and took his hand. Mom wouldn't want you to be miserable out of loyalty to her. She would want you to be happy. She always wanted you to be happy. But Lyra doesn't feel that way about me. I'm just a friend to her, a project she took on to help herself heal. Have you asked her? I can't. What if I'm wrong? I'll ruin everything. Ruth squeezed his hand. Dad, you're 71 years old. You spent your whole life taking risks. You left Earth to work on Europa. You married an alien woman when everyone said it wouldn't work. You raised a daughter who's half human and half Thalassan, in a world that didn't quite know what to do with her. Don't lose your courage now. After Ruth left to settle into the guest room, Henry sat alone in the living room and thought about Maria's words. The heart is an ocean. It has room for many tides. She had known him so well, had known he would torture himself with guilt, would try to preserve their love by refusing to love again. But maybe that wasn't preserving anything. Maybe that was just letting fear win. Peter Donovan stopped by the next afternoon, his mobility chair humming smoothly now after Henry's repairs. He found Henry sitting on the back deck staring at the ocean. You look like hell, Peter said bluntly. He was 92 years old and had lost 3 spouses in his long life. He didn't believe in dancing around uncomfortable truths. Thanks, Peter. Where's your dragon lady? She's not my dragon lady. She should be. Everyone in the colony can see it except apparently you two. Peter maneuvered his chair closer. You know what your problem is? You're doing what humans do worst. You're overthinking love. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You love her. She probably loves you. You're both idiots who are making yourselves miserable for no good reason. Peter leaned forward. Listen to me. I've been married 3 times. Lost every one of them. Each time I thought I couldn't survive it, couldn't imagine loving anyone else. And each time I was wrong. The heart doesn't run out of room. It just keeps expanding. She's going to outlive me by 200 years, so what? You think she doesn't know that? You think she didn't think about that before she knocked on your door? Peter shook his head. We live short lives compared to most species in the galaxy. Every moment matters for us. Maria loved you because you were brave enough to love an alien woman when most humans stuck to their own kind. Don't lose that courage now. Don't waste whatever time you have left being afraid. After Peter left, Henry sat on the deck until the sun began to set. Then he stood up, walked to his closet, and pulled out the small box he had been avoiding for months. Inside was Maria's collection of singing shells. He picked them up one by one, held each to his ear even though they remained silent, and said goodbye properly for the first time. I love you, he whispered. I will always love you. But I think I love her too, and I need to know if that's okay with you. The shells offered no answer. But in his heart, Henry thought he could hear Maria's voice, like water over stones, saying what she had always said when he was afraid to take a risk. So jump already. Stop thinking and just jump. The storm warning came through on the emergency broadcast system 3 days after Ruth had returned to Mars. A major weather system was moving up the coast, the kind that brought winds strong enough to tear roofs off and waves that could reshape the shoreline. The colony went into preparation mode, everyone securing their homes and stocking up on supplies. Henry worked alone, checking his windows and storm shutters, making sure everything was properly sealed. He kept glancing toward Lyra's house, wondering if she needed help, but he hadn't talked to her in 3 weeks. She had respected his request for space completely, which somehow made everything worse. The rain started just after dark, light at first, but quickly building to a hammering downpour. Wind screamed around the house, rattling windows and making the whole structure creak and groan. Henry stood on Maria's viewing platform, the one she had loved so much, watching the storm roll in across the black ocean. Lightning split the sky, illuminating massive waves that crashed against the cliffs below. He should go inside. Should get away from the windows. But something kept him there, remembering all the storms he and Maria had watched together. Her hand in his, her eyes reflecting the lightning. A knock at the door made him jump. For a moment he thought he had imagined it. Then it came again, louder, insistent even over the howl of the wind. He hurried to the door and opened it. Lyra stood on his porch, soaked to the bone, water streaming off her scales. She looked angry and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Your roof is loose on the northwest corner, she said, her voice cutting through the storm. I saw it from my house. If this wind keeps up, you will lose shingles. I brought repair materials. You came out in this storm to tell me about my roof? I came to make sure your house is secure. She pushed past him, carrying a bag of sealant and fasteners. And to make sure you are not doing anything stupid like standing too close to windows during a lightning storm. Henry closed the door against the wind. Lyra stood in his living room, dripping water on the floor, and he had never been more aware of her presence. She was breathing hard, whether from exertion or emotion he couldn't tell. Her amber eyes glowed in the dim emergency lighting. "That's not why you're here," Henry said quietly. "No," she set down the bag. "It is not. Why then?" "Because I am tired of pretending." Lyra's voice was rough, almost desperate. "Because I have spent 3 weeks alone in my house trying to respect your wishes, and every day has been worse than the last. Because I cannot stop thinking about you, cannot stop wanting to be near you, and I do not know how to make these feelings stop." Henry's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "Lyra, let me finish." She moved closer and he could feel the heat radiating from her body, the barely controlled temperature of a draken under emotional stress. "I am 174 years old. I have lived 3 of your lifetimes. I will live 4 more after you are gone. These are facts I cannot change. But I have learned something in these months with you. Henry Walsh. I have learned that a short time lived fully is worth more than centuries of simply existing." "I love you," Henry said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I've been falling in love with you for months and I felt guilty about it, like I was betraying Maria. So I pushed you away because I was afraid and stupid and couldn't figure out how to tell you the truth." Lyra stared at him. "You love me?" "Yes, and I know it's complicated. I know you'll outlive me by hundreds of years. I know I'm old and human and nothing like your mate Torvin. But I can't help how I feel. I love you." "You are an idiot," Lyra said, but her voice was gentle. She reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her scales warm against his skin. "The Draken way is to love once and carry that love forever. This is what we are taught, what our culture demands. But I've been researching our history, going back before the war, before the traditions became rigid. Once, long ago, my people believed differently. They believed that each love honored the previous ones, that the heart could hold multiples without diminishing any of them." She stroked his cheek with her thumb. "I loved Torvin with everything I was. He was my first love, my foundation. But you, Henry, you are my second love. And that does not make it less real. It does not dishonor what came before. It is simply different, as you are different, as we are different together than I was with him. Your people will judge you for this," Henry said. "They'll say you're betraying your mate's memory. Let them judge. I am choosing the old way, the honest way. I am choosing you." She leaned her forehead against his. "I am choosing whatever time we have, however short or long it may be. Because these months with you have made me feel alive again. You have given me purpose, laughter, joy. You have reminded me what it means to live rather than simply endure." Outside, the storm raged harder. Lightning flashed and thunder shook the house. But Henry barely noticed. He was holding Lyra, and she was holding him. And for the first time since Maria had died, he felt complete. "I'm 71 years old," he said against her shoulder. "I might have 20 years left if I'm lucky, maybe 30. Then we will make those years count for centuries." Lyra pulled back to look at him. "We will fill them so full of life and love that when you are gone, I will have enough memories to sustain me for all the years that follow. And I will honor you by living fully, by continuing the work we started together, by showing the galaxy that love transcends all boundaries." They stood together in his living room, human and Draken, 2 beings who had found each other in grief and built something new from the ruins of their losses. The storm howled around them, but Henry felt no fear. Maria had always said that storms proved the house was strong. He thought maybe she had been talking about more than just the building. "Come on," Lyra said, releasing him and picking up her bag of repair materials. "Let us fix your roof before the wind tears it off. We can discuss our future after we make sure we have one." They spent the next 2 hours up on the roof in the pouring rain, Henry holding materials while Lyra used her heat to seal and bond the loose shingles. It was dangerous and ridiculous and absolutely necessary. When they finally climbed back down, soaked and exhausted, they stripped out of their wet clothes and sat together wrapped in blankets, drinking hot tea and watching the storm through the windows. "We should tell Ruth," Henry said. "She already knows." Lyra smiled. "She called me yesterday. Said her father was being an idiot and would I please knock some sense into him. She is a wise woman, your daughter. She gets that from her mother. And from you. Lyra took his hand. You raised a child who carries both human and Thalassian heritage. You built a life with a being from another world. You have spent your whole life crossing boundaries that seemed impossible to cross. This is just one more bridge to build. Henry thought about that. Thought about all the choices he had made in his life, all the risks he had taken, leaving Earth for Europa, falling in love with Maria despite everyone's doubts, raising Ruth to be proud of both her heritages, coming out of his grief to help neighbors who needed him. Each choice had required courage. Each bridge had seemed impossible until he started building it. This was just one more bridge. Human and Draken, old and older, brief life and long life, love after loss. It should have been impossible, but standing there with Lyra's hand in his, Henry realized that impossible was just another word for something no one had tried yet. 5 years later, Henry celebrated his 76th birthday surrounded by friends and family. His house had become a gathering place for the colony, always full of people from different species who came together to share meals and stories. Ruth and her family visited from Mars regularly, and Ruth's children called Lyra Auntie Dragon and climbed all over her despite her protests. The singing shells still sat on the mantelpiece, silent but treasured. Next to them now sat a smooth stone that Torvin had collected from an asteroid, a piece of Lyra's history, sitting comfortably beside Maria's memory. The two loves didn't compete. They simply existed together, each honored and remembered. Henry moved slower now, his body feeling every one of its 76 years. But Lyra was always there, warm and steady, helping him upstairs and making sure he took his medications. They worked together still, fixing things for neighbors, helping newly grieving people find their way through loss. The Henry Protocol had spread to other colonies across Earth and beyond, a simple idea that had somehow changed how the galaxy thought about grief and healing. One evening, as they sat on the back deck watching the sunset, a young Thalassian woman knocked on their door. She was newly widowed, lost in grief, barely able to speak through her tears. Henry and Lyra looked at each other, that wordless communication that came from years of partnership passing between them. Come in, Henry said, opening the door wider. We will help you. We have been where you are. The young woman entered, and they made her tea and listened to her story. They shared their own stories in return, showing her that survival was possible, that grief didn't have to be the end of everything. When she finally left hours later, she looked different. Still sad, still grieving, but no longer quite so lost. She had seen that there was a path through the darkness, even if she couldn't quite see where it led yet. After she left, Lyra leaned against Henry on the couch. We did good work today. We do good work every day. Henry kissed the top of her head, marveling as always at the warmth of her. Thank you for knocking on my door that day. Thank you for refusing to leave. Thank you for being worth saving. Lyra took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Thank you for teaching me that the heart truly is an ocean, that it has room for many tides. They sat together as darkness fell outside. Two beings from different worlds who had found each other in grief and built something beautiful from loss. The galaxy was vast and full of different species with different ways of living and loving and mourning. But Henry and Lyra had proven something important. They had proven that love could cross any boundary, survive any loss, bridge any gap. They had proven that humanity's greatest gift to the stars wasn't technology or warfare or even adaptability. It was the simple, stubborn courage to keep loving even when love meant certain loss, to keep building connections even when those connections were temporary, to keep choosing life and joy and hope even in the face of grief and death and darkness. That was what it meant to be human, not giving up, not isolating, but reaching across the void again and again, saying, I see you, I value you, let me help you, regardless of differences or difficulties or the certainty of future pain. And sometimes when humans were very lucky, other beings reached back, and together they built bridges that changed the galaxy, one connection at a time, one act of courage at a time, one choice to love despite everything at a time. Henry Walsh had lost his Sea Maiden wife at 71, but the dragon lady next door had knocked and said, I'll stay. And in that simple act of stubborn compassion, they had both been saved. Not just from grief, but into a new kind of life neither had expected to find. A life that honored what came before while embracing what came next. A life that proved love didn't have to end just because people did. A life that showed the whole galaxy what humanity did best: survive, adapt, love fiercely, and refuse to give up on connection no matter what the cost. That was the bridge they had built, and it would stand long after Henry was gone, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. Lyra would carry it forward, teaching others what Henry had taught her, keeping his memory alive not through mourning but through living fully and helping others do the same. The heart was an ocean. It had room for many tides, and Henry Walsh, engineer and bridge builder, had proven that truth one final time.